Plant it once. 30 years of harvests. No replanting, no tilling, no seasonal shopping for seed stock. 15 to 25 tons of food per acre. Survives at negative 30 degrees Celsius. Beats every pest that takes down your potato bed. It outproduces the potato almost everywhere it grows. And nobody told you about it. Something that productive. Something that reliable. Something that asks almost nothing and gives back for 3 decades. It should be in every garden, every homestead, every backyard food plan in the world. Instead, most people have never even heard the name. That's not an accident. Welcome to Root Vault, where we dig up the food knowledge that was buried before you were born. The plant is called Helianthus tuberosus. Its common name is Jerusalem artichoke. And that name is a masterpiece of misdirection, because it has nothing to do with Jerusalem and nothing to do with artichokes. It is a sunflower native to Central North America. Indigenous peoples across the continent cultivated it for centuries as a primary food crop long before European contact. When French explorer Samuel de Champlain encountered it along the northeastern coast in the early 1600s, he sent specimens back to France. Within decades, it had swept across Europe. By the mid-1600s, it was one of the most commonly eaten vegetables on 2 continents. Then, something happened. Over the following 2 centuries, it quietly vanished from mainstream food culture in North America, the very continent where it was born. Let's talk about what this plant actually does, because the numbers are not normal. 1 planting. Perennial return every single year. Typical yields run 15 to 25 tons per acre, with documented highs beyond that under good conditions. Per plant, you're pulling 3 to 6 pounds of tubers from a single root system. Leave it in the ground and it multiplies. Leave it for decades and it expands, producing more food in year 10 than it did in year 1. The potato, the crop the entire industrial food system was built around, yields roughly half that under equivalent conditions in most temperate climates, and it requires buying or saving seed, tilling the bed, replanting every single year, and managing a pest load heavy enough to reshape Irish history. Jerusalem artichoke has no significant pest profile. Nothing systematically destroys it the way blight destroys potatoes. It competes down weeds on its own. It survives drought. It handles poor soil. It grows in partial shade. It comes back after hard frost. It tolerates pH ranges from 5 to 8. Do the math. One afternoon, planting a small patch of tubers. 3 decades of harvest without buying a single thing. That's the offer on the table. Now, why did it disappear? 5 reasons. Every one of them traceable. None of them accidental. First, it doesn't behave like a commodity crop. It spreads underground through rhizomes and daughter tubers. You can't sell farmers new seed stock every spring because the plant replants itself. An agricultural economy built on annual seed sales has no business model for a perennial that propagates indefinitely from its own root system. Second, the industrial food system standardized the potato. It peeled uniformly. It processed cleanly. It moved through factory equipment without modification. The Jerusalem artichoke tuber is knobbly, irregular, and resistant to mechanical peeling. Every food processing line built around the potato made the sunchoke harder to adopt commercially. Number 3, the post-war suburban garden was redesigned around ornament, not survival. Extension services promoted lawn culture, flower beds, and a narrow list of approved vegetables that happened to align with what seed catalogs were selling. A 9-foot-tall perennial sunflower that spreads on its own and does not require seasonal involvement was not part of that vision. Number 4, the USDA and land-grant universities directed research dollars toward annual crops that required annual inputs, fertilizer, pesticide, herbicide, and fresh seed. Perennial food crops that needed none of those inputs received almost no institutional attention for most of the 20th century. Number 5, it was demonized. 17th century English botanist John Goodyear wrote that Jerusalem artichokes cause a filthy wind within the body and are fit more for swine than for men. That sentiment, comic but persistent, followed the plant for 400 years and gave people a cultural excuse to dismiss it without ever trying it properly. All 5 reasons, stacked together, buried a food crop that could have been feeding the world. Here's what they buried. Jerusalem artichoke tubers store their carbohydrates not as starch, which converts rapidly into blood glucose, but as inulin. That single difference changes everything for the approximately 500 million people globally managing blood sugar. Inulin is a fructooligosaccharide. Human digestive enzymes cannot break it down. It passes into the colon intact, where it feeds beneficial gut bacteria, acting as a prebiotic at a potency that very few whole foods can match. Studies published in peer-reviewed journals have documented measurable improvements in gut microbiota composition, increases in short-chain fatty acid production, and reduced inflammatory markers in subjects eating Jerusalem artichoke regularly. The glycemic index of a raw Jerusalem artichoke sits at approximately 32. A raw white potato registers around 60. That's not a marginal difference. That's a different category of food entirely. Clinical research confirmed that 12 weeks of Jerusalem artichoke consumption significantly inhibited the rise of postprandial blood glucose, the spike after eating that quietly damages blood vessels over time. For people watching their blood sugar, managing insulin sensitivity, or simply trying to eat in a way that does not flood their system with glucose several times a day, this is not a niche vegetable. This is a staple that belongs in medical nutrition guidance worldwide. Beyond blood sugar, the nutritional picture is dense. Potassium, 650 milligrams per cup, more than a banana. Iron, comparable to a serving of lean meat with no fat and no cholesterol. Vitamin C, folic acid, carotenoids, thiamine, phosphorus, niacin, copper. All of it in a root vegetable that grows in a backyard for 30 years without asking anything in return. Now let's talk about how the plant actually works, because understanding the biology is what separates someone who tries it once and gives up from someone who harvests it for 3 decades. Jerusalem artichoke is a herbaceous perennial in the sunflower family. It grows upright to between 5 and 10 feet tall, depending on conditions. In late summer and fall, it produces clusters of small, bright yellow flowers, beautiful enough that some people grow it as an ornamental without ever knowing it's edible. Underground, it builds a root system that spreads through rhizomes and generates knobby tubers at intervals. Those tubers are the harvest. They handle ground temperatures as low as negative 30 degrees Celsius, buried safe beneath the frost line, essentially a living root cellar that maintains the food supply through the hardest part of winter. In spring, before any intervention, new shoots emerge from tubers left in the ground. The cycle begins again, on its own. That underground persistence is exactly what makes it both remarkable and worth placing thoughtfully. Plant it where it's meant to stay, because it will stay. Its competitiveness against surrounding vegetation is high. In the right context, a food forest edge, a windbreak row, a dedicated perennial bed, that characteristic is a profound advantage. Place it with intention, then leave it alone, and feed yourself for a generation. Planting is nearly foolproof. Source whole tubers or cut pieces with at least one viable eye each. Plant in early spring when soil has thawed, roughly 10 to 15 centimeters deep, spaced about 30 centimeters apart in rows. Full sun produces the heaviest yields, but the plant tolerates partial shade, growing somewhat more slowly and somewhat less prolifically. Soil preference is flexible. Best performance comes in well-drained, moderately fertile ground with pH between 5 and 8. Sandy and clay soils both work, though heavy waterlogged clay reduces yields and risks tuber rot. Add compost at planting if soil is poor. After that first season, the plant manages its own fertility. Water during the first season through dry spells to let tubers establish fully. Once that root system is embedded in the ground, drought becomes an inconvenience, not a threat. When stems reach about 30 centimeters, mound soil around the base to stabilize them. On windy sites, stake taller varieties before they become top-heavy in late summer. Cutting stems back to about 1.5 meters in late summer can redirect energy from height into tuber production, but no lower, because cutting too hard reduces the harvest. Harvest begins in late autumn after the first hard frost hits the tops and turns the foliage yellow. That frost is not the enemy. It is doing a favor. Cold triggers the conversion of inulin into sweeter, more digestible fructose, improving both flavor and digestibility while the tubers are still in the ground. Cut dead stems back to about 8 centimeters. Mark the spot. Then harvest with a garden fork as needed throughout winter and into early spring. The tubers hold in the ground indefinitely through the cold months, patient and firm, waiting to be called. Once dug, they don't keep long at room temperature. Use them within 1 to 2 weeks or refrigerate them sealed, where they stay firm for months. The simplest strategy is also the best. Leave them underground and dig only what's needed for the week. Keep back a portion of firm, healthy tubers each season to expand the bed or start a new one. Within 3 to 5 years, a modest initial planting becomes a substantial perennial food source. Within a decade, it becomes infrastructure. In the kitchen, treat them the way you'd treat a potato, but expect something better. They roast to golden sweetness. They puree into velvety soups with a nutty depth no potato quite matches. Raw and sliced thin, they add crunch and faint sweetness to salads that most people find unexpectedly refined. They pickle cleanly in vinegar brine. They steam in a fraction of the time a potato requires, roughly 5 times faster. The gas problem that dogged their reputation for centuries is real but manageable. Thorough cooking breaks down inulin chains. A simple overnight soak in lightly salted water dramatically reduces the effect. Slow roasting or steaming rather than rapid boiling produces a more digestible result. And for most people, the body adapts after a few weeks of regular consumption as gut bacteria adjust to the higher prebiotic load. 400 years of cultural embarrassment solved with 20 minutes in a roasting pan. Indigenous peoples of the Americas understood something that industrial agriculture spent a century working to make everyone forget. The most dependable food is the food that does not need you. Jerusalem artichoke survives without irrigation in most temperate climates once established. It grows without pesticides. It returns without replanting. It multiplies without investment. It feeds the soil below while feeding people above. Its deep root system improves structure, reduces erosion, and returns organic matter to the ground with every passing year. In 2002, at the Nice Festival for the Heritage of French Cuisine, it was voted the best soup vegetable. Lewis and Clark recorded eating it in what is now North Dakota, prepared by an indigenous woman who knew exactly what it was worth, and described it as one of the most satisfying foods of their entire expedition. It crossed the Atlantic in the early 1600s and became, within 50 years, one of the most common vegetables on 2 continents. Then it was quietly dismantled from the food culture of the very continent where it originated, replaced with annual crops that required annual spending, replaced with potatoes that demanded replanting and chemical inputs every single season, replaced with a system that profits from dependence season after season, year after year. That's not progress, that's a business model. A single backyard plot, 20 by 20 feet, can yield enough Jerusalem artichokes to provide meaningful carbohydrate calories, gut-supporting prebiotics, blood sugar regulation, and mineral nutrition to a family through months of winter, without irrigation infrastructure, without synthetic fertilizer, without any input beyond the first afternoon of planting. Run that math against annual grocery spending on produce. Run it against the cost of probiotic supplements and gut health products lining pharmacy shelves. Run it against the compounding health costs tied to blood sugar dysregulation in a society that built its diet on high glycemic staple foods. Jerusalem artichoke does not just feed you, it feeds you differently. It feeds the bacteria that keep you healthy. It stabilizes blood chemistry in a way potatoes never could. And it does all of that year after year, decade after decade, without outside input, without recurring cost, and without anyone else's permission. That's exactly why it was erased. A food that multiplies on its own, stores itself underground through winter, requires no annual purchase, outproduces the dominant staple crop, stabilizes blood sugar instead of spiking it, and improves gut health as a natural consequence of eating it. That food is a direct threat to a food system built on dependence, not a conspiracy, a pattern. And patterns do not need a boardroom meeting to sustain themselves, they just need the absence of information. Now you have the information. 1 tuber buried in spring is 30 years of food. 1 small bed is a decade of gut-supporting fiber. 1 forgotten plant replanted in the right corner of the right garden is food security that no supply chain disruption, no price spike, and no failed growing season can take away. Plant perennial abundance instead of annual dependence. Plant what endures instead of what expires. Plant the food that stays, quiet underground, patient through every frost, and then returns without fail every single spring. Now you know, Now you can choose to grow what others chose to forget. If this changed the way you see your garden and your food supply, hit like and drop a comment below telling us what you're planning to plant next. And if you want to keep uncovering food knowledge that was buried long before the grocery store was your only option, subscribe to Root Vault. This is only the beginning.